In 2025, the software market in Europe is projected to generate revenues of approximately $166.5 billion. Welcome to this week's App Dev Angle. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead for the App Dev practice at theCUBE Research. Today I'm joined by Mike from the Eclipse Foundation. Hey Mike, how you doing?
Great, Paul. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and about the Eclipse Foundation?
Sure. Mike Milinkovich, been the executive director of the Eclipse Foundation for now a little over 20 years, and that's been the length of the Eclipse Foundation. The Eclipse Foundation has started as one of the very first open source foundations, and in particular one of the first open source foundations that was brought forward with not just the support of open source developers and community, but also corporate support. So it's corporate supported by corporate members. And so we've always had a really strong interest in making sure that our open source projects are fit for commercial use, and and one of the measures of success we have for our projects is, are they used in commercial products? And of course, that means that we have a really strong interest in making sure that we are a strong partner in the open source supply chain as manufacturers build products based on top of open source software.
Hey, Mike, with the growth of applications and software development, it's incredibly important to have policies, controls, governance in place in order to make sure that things are working the way they should be working, right? So when we look at the topic of today, we're looking at the European Union's new Cyber Resiliency Act, or CRA, right, which was really basically put in place to help software products that are designed and maintained really with security in mind, basically throughout their life cycle, right? And when we look at the impacts of CR software and security and such, as I stated, $166 billion in revenue, meaning that CRA compliance will be required across a variety of different applications, from enterprise software to consumer applications. And Mike, when I look at it, there's a lot of things that are going on here, right? Whether it's software supply chain, all the open source dependencies, both direct and indirect. There's software bill of materials, or SBOMs, that have to be understood and documented. And there's also the ability having the ability to track the maintainer activity to ensure that critical security updates are applied. What are your thoughts around this? And is this going to help, or what do you think?
Well, yes, it's going to help. You have to keep in mind that this is a big change for the industry, but it's coming. The motivation for it is coming from a really good spot. The motivation for this regulation is to improve the cybersecurity of the products that are being put on the market in Europe, to protect the consumers and the businesses in Europe from shoddy software. But it's interesting to keep in mind that we're not talking just software here. It's basically the term that they use is products with digital elements. So everything that embeds software, from your webcam to perhaps even your refrigerator, as well as pure software products, are all falls within the remit of the CRA. So this is the world's first horizontal regulation of the software industry. And anytime an industry goes from being regulated, non-regulated, to regulated, there's always big changes. The focus here is on cybersecurity. And it goes from, and there's elements in there that are focusing on promoting secure by design software development. There's also elements in there that are focused on securing the supply chain. And this is going to really change the dynamics of how manufacturers interact with their open source suppliers. For years, if you're building products with based on top of open source software, it's been sort of like, thanks for the free stuff. And there hasn't been a lot of interaction back between the manufacturers and the developers, the community behind the project. And the reason why is there's been no reason to. There's no forcing function for that interaction to go back. With the CRA, every time you put an open source project into the code base of a product that you're going to sell to consumers, you need to have some due diligence that you need to have in place with regards to the project that you're using. And that can be, that due diligence is still somewhat to be determined, but there's the status quo of I don't need to interact with the project is simply no longer going to be the case. And how that's all going to play out over time, I don't think anybody really knows. But what I do know is that there's a very different set of economic incentives that are going to go into how manufacturers interact with their open source supply chain than there is today. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that dynamic plays out over time.
I agree. I think that if you look at some of the pieces that you were mentioning, right? One of the things that with the CRA enforcing secure by design principles, right? Those secure by design principles, it really is a way, as you kind of alluded to and mentioned, it's a proactive security measure throughout the entire SDLC, right? So it really helps with that, that security principles first approach. In fact, what we see in our research, we see that this aligns with industry trends, right? 43% of EU enterprises already use ERP software and 25% use CRM software, with both of which require strong security postures, right? And because of that, automation, compliance, security checks really need to be implemented across the CI/CD pipeline. And this includes automation for security scanning, dependency tracking, and compliance validation, right? All of this requires a new set of tools. So Mike, when we think about the tools, especially when you think of like container scanning tools or vulnerability management processes, what new opportunities do you see being put in place that would help, help with this remediation of issues quickly as we move to this new model?
Well, there's a couple of different things going on. So first of all, there's private investment that's going into building next generation tools. If you spend some time searching around, you can find references to startups that are coming into place that are working on CRA compliance tooling. But there's also the open source ecosystem and community is reacting as well. And there are even projects at the Eclipse Foundation itself, which are working on building the kinds of tools that you're going to need to help with this compliance. And of course, there's a lot of work that's been going on for the last couple of years around helping produce, store, and manage SBOMs for the code that is flowing through the supply chain as well. So there's a bunch of things that are happening in the tools. But one of the things that we think is pretty interesting is the work that we're doing in the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group, where we've gathered together some leading industry heavyweights. Think companies like Nokia and Mercedes-Benz, along with at this point most of the open source foundations out there in the world, to come together to figure out things like how are we going to manage vulnerability reporting across the supply chain. And so one of the things that needs to be done as part of implementing the CRA is the development of around 40 different European harmonized standards that are going to spell out these requirements. And the work that's happening in ORC, where we're bringing together the manufacturers and the open source foundations, which under the CRA are referred to as open source software stewards, that work of dealing with the interaction between the manufacturers and the stewards, that's where it's happening. And that's where discussions are happening. And where the Eclipse Foundation, I should have mentioned this earlier, is actually the largest open source foundation based in Europe. Our legal domicile is in Belgium. And so we have a liaison relationship with the European standard setting bodies because we are a European organization that is allowing us to take the work that's happening in the open source community and directing that so that it influences these European standards as they're being developed.
Yeah, and this is not just a European standard, right? I mean, we see this globally across different areas. I mean, there's compliance and regulations that need to be put in place. And if they're not put in place, there's consequences, right? There are consequences that occur. I mean, when you look at the European market alone, right, the software industry contributes to $1 trillion of the EU GDP, right? That makes a huge, major economic driver for Europe, right? So, and non-compliance can mean these like legal risks, market exclusions, reputation damages, anything that you can think of that would really not be beneficial to that, not just economic, but also all the other things we just talked about. So developers are really going to need to start thinking about and integrating security into code and development workflows now, right? And think about what that means, even if it's not, fully rolled out, so to speak, it still needs to be in compliance and regulations. And building something now needs to follow those updates and standards that are put in place. And these CRA implementation guidelines seem to be the right way to go. Does that make sense when it comes to the open regulatory compliance work groups or some of the other areas that would help with driving these new software development life cycles and products in place?
Yeah, well, let's comment on the first part of that, which is that, yes, this is a European regulation, but it applies to any product which is placed on the European market. So if you are a US-based company or a China-based company and you are selling your products to Europe, this applies to you, even though you're not a European company. So this regulation does have global impact. Now, in terms of the actual standards that are being placed, that are being developed, one of the things that we think is really an interesting opportunity here is in today, as of this moment, if you were to go out and read any of the existing standards on developing secure software, what you'll quickly find or quickly notice is those standards are written with the expectation that the software being developed is proprietary, that it's being developed by a single company that controls the developers, controls the infrastructure that those developers are working on. And that simply is not reflective of how modern software systems are built. There's very, very few software systems of any kind that are built 100% proprietary in-house. Everything these days relies upon open source dependencies that they're pulling in that form sort of basically gives you the ability to implement all the non-differentiating features that have to be in your application or product. And so that really makes that's a real opportunity that I think the CRA is driving, where manufacturers and the open source community can come together and start building a next generation of secure development process standards that are reflective of how software is actually built today. And I think that's really the opportunity that we're trying to drive here is let's not just think about the CRA, obviously that's the forcing function,
Sure.
But let's think about how we can come up with a next generation of secure software development standards that actually take into account that, as much as 80 or 90% of the software that you're shipping in your product is coming from open source dependencies, and how you secure those, how you maintain those, how you fix those, how you deliver those fixes to your customers in the field. That should be the focus for secure software processes.
Oh, without a doubt, Mike. Without a doubt. This is something that it seems like there's kind of two ways to look at it. It's common sense, right? Like how do you fix things that make it more operational effective or efficiencies and put that in place and have compliance and guidelines and regulations and rules. But then there's also enforcement, right? And enforcement that's when it starts getting real, right? Because there's accountability that companies have, right? That if you build an application, you're responsible for that application, right? But if you build an application, push it out the door, and something goes wrong with it, if there's no regulations or enforcement in place, it's like, oh, my bad, it didn't work, right? But now it's like, okay, well, if you put enforcement in place, like where we see something like CRA being enforcement starting in December of 2027, it's really closer than that, right? Because the key steps like reporting obligations, they actually begin in September 2026, right? So developers really need to start assessing the code base now and securing the dependencies, not just for best practices like you're talking about, and not just for working with the delivery, but it's also about compliance-friendly development practices need to be in place, because this is happening much faster than organizations probably even believed to know. Would you agree with that, or do you think that they have some time?
No, totally. So one of my pet peeves on this whole topic right now is that how unaware industry is of this, and the vast majority are simply not aware, and so that's why we're doing things like this to try to raise awareness that yes, the world is changing and you need to change with it. Is a really important message. But then there's also the fact that the companies. If you play back how fast that 3 years is going to go by, right? So if your product in December 2027 has to have a CE mark on it to ship that product in Europe, if you work your way backwards into, okay, what kind of product is, what do I have to do to get the CE mark certification? Can I do it myself? Do I need an external auditor? And then developing the European harmonized standards that give you the presumption of conformance with the law and the regulation, right? Basically, we're already out of time. I mean, the timelines that we're working to in terms of getting the first drafts of these standards out is like next month, right? And so it's because it takes that long to then get it through the standardization process. Then it takes that, because one thing to keep in mind, we haven't really touched on this yet, is that there's a lot of different software products, think operating systems, think identity management systems, and so on, that have a higher order of criticality, where you're going to actually have to get an external auditor to come in to certify that you're following these best practices and these standards in terms of how to do the development, in order to be able to sell the product in Europe. And so that all of this takes time, including, by the way, training these auditors that aren't even yet hired and so on. So getting all of this work done over the next couple of years, it's giddy up. Like
we're kind of behind the 8 ball, I think.
Absolutely.
With this, it's scary, the amount of resources that are needed. I think that there's, just from my perspective, usually when you have skill gap issues like this, where there's like a big project, big initiative that has to come on, service delivery partners will step up, and they'll step up and help these organizations reach the compliance and regulation. So to the audience, that's an area that you can explore if you're watching this go, whoa, this is way overwhelming, I don't know what to do, but you can always reach out to a service delivery partner, that's somebody that knows, a trusted advisor that can help you with this. So Mike, I know we just really touched a little bit of this, and I know the objective of this is really to get it out there and amplify this message, and that's what we're trying to do. Where can the audience go to learn more about the details of this and the CRA obligations, and maybe what they need to do to execute today?
So the best resource out there today is at the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group. The URL is orcwg.org. That's Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group.org. And on there's a number of resources there. There's a resources tab, and you can explore there. But one of the most interesting resources is a very detailed and lengthy frequently asked questions, because there's so many different corner cases that need to be considered. And there's the FAQ covers everything from the obligations of a manufacturer, what do you have to do based on the kind of product that you want to ship, to the obligations of open source software stewards like foundations, but also a software steward could be like Red Hat is the steward of the Fedora project. So it's not all just nonprofit foundations. To obligations, if you're just an individual developer that's working on an open source project on GitHub, like are you obligated to do stuff? So these are all frequently asked questions, and so there's really good work that's going on at ORC to basically address all of these questions and concerns. And so if there's a single resource out there that I would point people to, that's definitely the one.
Yeah, Mike, thank you again for attending our being our guest today and joining us today. This has been really enlightening for me, and hopefully it's been enlightening for the audience. I also give a big thank you out for all of you for tuning in. This is an important topic, and it's important to think about, especially if you're building your software development and you're not sure what to do. take advantage of these resources. We appreciate you being part of the AppDevAngle community. That wraps up this episode today, but we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of the application development market. Whether you're deploying to the edge, building with AI, or modernizing the cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social, and if you have any thoughts, questions, or just want to connect, you can always reach me at pauln@siliconangle.com. Until next time, stay curious and stay building. Thank you.